everyone, I'm Shaheen from The Content Mix, and I'm excited to be here with Ishani Bechoo, who has a long career in journalism and communications and is currently Global Social Media Manager at Arup, a global design consultancy based in the UK. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Shaheen.
So to start out, can you just tell us a bit about your background and a bit more about that long history you have in journalism, communications, and now social media marketing?
Okay, I started out as a journalist. So I trained as a journalist and then worked at independent newspapers in South Africa for 6.5 years. That was quite an interesting time, actually. I covered a full range of beats from court reporting, crime, health, and general reporting on a daily newspaper. And it was the late 90s, so Nelson Mandela was the president at the time. So as part of my job, I had the honor of meeting him. I then decided to take a year off and go on a working holiday to the UK, and with the promise to return, but I didn't. So here I am 19 years later, still in London, working in communications and marketing teams. I worked across, sectors, so government, private, charities, international development, higher education. And I'm back in professional services right now at a firm called Arup. But I feel like I've worked, across the full range of external comms, from working in a press office and doing PR to doing lots of publishing roles, editing, writing, working on magazines, and then making a conscious effort really into the kind of digital marketing space. So starting off, initially, looking after e-newsletters and growing audiences there, and then managing sort of, web content, setting up newsletter campaigns, moving on to website management. So, at the International Development Agency I worked on, I launched and ran a website. In my last role, I worked at UCL, the university in London, as the head of digital communications. And there I led the redesign of the university's homepage, which was quite a really interesting job. The homepage itself receives about 1 million hits a month, and I also developed a social media strategy for them. And then that led me to my current role at Arup, where I've been for about just over 2 years, focusing on the global social media channels.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have a really similar story. Both have worked at daily newspapers, left to do a year abroad, and didn't go back. And I'm curious. I feel like newspapers, the time that I worked there was like the end of like a golden era. I don't know about for you. You, I guess, were a little bit before me. For me, it was 10 years ago. But yeah, it was, I think, a really amazing opportunity to work in that field at that time, because they had like so much resources and such like professionalism and ethical, I guess, and journalistic standards, that it was like a really, I think, unique opportunity. I wonder, yeah, as I imagine the same trend has happened to papers in South Africa.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that, we're lucky because we were able to sort of cut our teeth and establish our foundations in that kind of very professional environment where we had to work a little bit harder because we didn't have, there were lots of conversations, especially in my time, picking up the phone. You had to really know your, media law and be really, careful about content, checking, double checking, etc. And especially with the newspaper, as you well know, there's no opportunity for error. You can't, delete content quickly and replace it as you can now. But I think that kind of training has been really useful, because social media is really quite a risky medium. You get quite a lot of responses and quite a lot of scrutiny on social media. So you really need to be super careful. I say that social media was introduced to most of us as really, in a social way. So as something that isn't part of your professional world. And so in that sense, it's sometimes not taken as seriously as it should be. And we see that every day with even big brands getting it wrong on social media. So I think you do need to have that level of, high level of professionalism in your approach to it.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. I know when I was working in newspapers, we were just experimenting with a lot of things like on the website and adding comment sections to stories. And it was back then, like comments were totally anonymous, and and so people were really like mean, gave really horrible feedback on like every story. I mean, how do you think? I guess like the online etiquette has evolved over the years, and how do you deal with
Well, I
comments?
can't. Yeah, I think that it's been a learning curve. I think even like social media is a relatively new specialism, a relatively new function. So people are constantly learning. In addition, it is constantly evolving and changing. People's behaviors as well are changing, and we know that there's a lot of sort of backlash, a lot of reactions on social media channels. I think it really is up to us as, the managers of channels and the professionals to take extra precautions. For us, at my current in my current role at Arup, thankfully we have quite a good brand, quite a credible brand, so we get lots of good engagement. I think equally it's important to engage with those communities that come to you. So I think people really want to feel heard and listened to. So as long as you have that positive, constant, engagement with your communities, because ultimately that's who we're targeting, then you're in a good place. But in terms of sort of, people and, the etiquette of actual followers, it's, you just have to be prepared for, different sorts of reactions and take that into consideration when you're creating your content to begin with.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the channels that you work with primarily for social and for content creation in your current role?
So I look after our four main global channels. So LinkedIn, which I would call our flagship because we're a B2B, and also because we have almost 500,000 followers. It's our biggest one. We have an Instagram channel. Again, really great opportunity there to reach out to our audiences. It's a really high growth channel for us, as well as Twitter and Facebook. We also have Arup is a global firm, so we work with all our regions. The Americas, Australasia, Southeast Asia, UK, IMEA, and Europe as a region. So within the regions, we also have channels, social media channels there, and they have a level of autonomy because, as you yourself know, you have that global overview and global standards, but it's really important to speak to people in their local languages or with lots of local context. So my part of my role is I connect and collaborate very closely with my colleagues in the regions. So the marketing and communication colleagues, as well as social media points of contact, to share guidance and knowledge and updates, as well as templates, etc., and strategy. So for example, a hashtag strategy, or any changes I might make on the global channels around word counts and that kind of thing, so that they can apply those, so that as a firm we have a kind of consistent style and tone of voice. Having said that, they do have they have the autonomy to create their content in whatever languages, and also to zone in on the kind of local regional projects that they want to talk about that we may not be able to necessarily cover on the global channels. But we're it's great because we work in close collaboration, and that's really, really helpful.
Mm-hmm. So had you worked with social media in your previous roles? I mean, I imagine yes, but like not to maybe the same degree as you are now. I think this is yeah. the first
Yes,
time your
yes.
title is social media manager.
Exactly. Yeah. So I have, because when you work on websites and on content, there's an immediate link between the two. So, you're creating content for a website or managing a website. You want to be able to promote that content. So I think, several years ago when I worked for an international development agency, GAIN, I launched the website and of course worked, very closely with making sure that everything we, put out. One of the things I did there is to make sure that we had dynamic content on the website. So we always had something new every single day. And then that was closely aligned with what we'd put out on social. So really, that helped to really grow our audiences. In my last job at UCL, the university, I put together a social media strategy for the university. And it was a little bit different because so the university's audience are students who are mostly digital natives. So they tend to communicate a lot on social media. So, there was a lot of dialogue. So it was a slightly different employer. I think now where I'm focused on social media, it's really great because I see it as something that is essential to marketing. It is, as I think you said it earlier, it's absolutely, of growing importance in our field. So this role has given me the opportunity to do a deep dive into social, not just on the organic side, but on the paid social side. So, we're running paid campaigns. I find them incredibly interesting because I love the fact that we have all this interesting data and analytics at our fingertips. We know so much about the audiences that we are targeting, their behaviors, what they like, what they don't like, a little bit about their profiles. And it is hugely successful. You can really easily reach out to people that you want to talk to. And if you know how to do it. So for me, I think it's really important to have that mix of really good content, but also align that with, your own business objectives, your audience insights, and really a really strong, compelling content. You have the ability to achieve success with campaigns. So it's, I love, when I think about, what I do every week, I've got the content gathering side, scheduling. I work with an agency who support me on, social media. And we, have our meetings to discuss opportunities and, how best to present content in a creative way. But what I love best is at the end of the week when I look at the analytics. So I do a review of, performance across our channels. I really look forward to that because that gives me such huge insights into performance. And then I use that information to feed back into our channels. And, we've had really good growth. I've been there 2 years, and on LinkedIn and Instagram, we've had between 30 and 40% follower growth, and much more growth on the engagement side, on the different channels, just by applying insights, plowing insights back into the different channels and really getting an understanding of what audiences are after.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I wanted to go back to something we were talking about before, about like your current role and your evolution into that role, because I think it's really interesting. From a lot of people I've talked in the podcast have similar job titles, and I think that the job title of social media manager didn't used to be such, or maybe didn't even exist before, but now it seems to be in a lot of cases like this really senior and strategic role in companies. And yeah, I was just curious on what you think the trend is happening there, I suppose.
I think that social media is a really powerful tool, and as a function within firms and organizations, it is going to be a growing one. Lots of firms do understand how important it is, and it's part of their sort of social media is part of their wider strategy. But I think many firms are still learning about it. If you imagine that, leadership of most firms and organizations have not necessarily grown up with social media. And I think I mentioned earlier that social media arrived in most of our lives as a kind of, a social tool rather than a professional tool. So I think it's the kind of thing that's taking a little bit longer to find its place in many firms and organizations. But I think you and I, Shaheen, will be, talking about this in 10 years from now, knowing that social media would hopefully have become an integral part of any business, of any organization. It's an important part of the business strategy and aligned with all the different other online channels, platforms, strategies, and external events that form part of any, the firm's marketing approach. So, yeah, I think it's not something that's going to go away. It really is part of the future. It is really going to be even bigger and more powerful. And despite the backlash, relating to many platforms, at the end of the day, that's where people congregate. That's where the audiences are, and we are all using social media. That's where many of us get most of our information, whether it's, shopping about products or news. That's the first port of call. And the sooner firms, organizations realize that they need to invest more in it and prioritize social media, the better. But at the same time, it's not a standalone. It's something that works alongside other strategies. It's something that works alongside, strong content pipelines. And, as someone who's worked on websites and email marketing, etc., these things are all part of the four, which should be underpinned by the same or fall within the same strategy, because audiences move between websites, our email newsletters, our CRMs, and we need to have that holistic view of their movements, of their behaviors, in order to successfully reach them. So, it sounds simple, but in practice, it's not necessarily the case in many places. But I think that is, for me, is what the future should look like, where it's an integral, where social media is an integral part of the business.
Do you think social media will replace traditional, I guess not traditional, but other publishing platforms? Because I think we're seeing increasingly people creating content specifically for certain social media platforms rather than using it as a promotional tool, as I think it was seen in the past.
Yeah, I think, I think the social media networks themselves are trying to keep people on social media channels. So they put us in a position where, yes, we want to collect these audiences, engage them, and then show them tell them all about ourselves through our websites, etc. But social media networks want to hold on to those audiences. So that means that, and then similarly, us as users, our attention spans are shrinking on a daily basis. So we want to quickly grasp what's going on, and something has to be really compelling for us to click further in order to find out more. So we need to understand that there needs to be some value behind social in order to get past that. I think things will continue to evolve and change, and we really need to be on top of that. So it is, there will be challenges, but I think social media also provides us with opportunities that we've never had before. And it really is up to us to kind of maneuver our way around that. And that does mean keeping up to date with what's happening on social networks, because they are constantly evolving.
So speaking of that, I wanted to go into recommendations. And my first question is what resources you recommend for staying up to date on marketing trends and what's going on in social media?
I try and keep up to date with trends by signing up to newsletters and alerts from Social Media Today and the likes. What also I also find helpful is I use the social media management tool called Hootsuite, which you probably know. One of the things I try to do in order to take my own advice of keeping up to date with what's going on is I've done a couple of certification courses through them. So they have Hootsuite Academy, and I've done advanced social media strategy, and I've done social ROI, and through those courses, it's really that helps me to also stay up to date and also builds my knowledge around social media. So as part of it, there are quite a lot of blogs, etc. I think there are lots of learning tools online. LinkedIn at the moment are offering quite a lot of free content and various other learning tools where I think you are exposed to useful blogs, etc. There's so much content out there, so it's really difficult to follow absolutely everything. But I think it is important to take that time to try and keep up to date with what's going on in the social media field.
Absolutely. And then, well, any favorite book or other resource?
So in terms of tools, I think again you need, in this, I guess in the social media space, it's really helpful to have a platform, a social media manager. So I use Hootsuite, but in the past I've used Sprout Social, etc. But together with that, and for me, it's incredibly important to have a good analytics tool. So I use Hootsuite Impact for to look at all the metrics on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, even doing year-on-year assessments. But I think alongside that, it's also helpful to use listening tools like in marketing and when you're working on content, like Brandwatch and Pulsar, which enable you to see what the conversations are that are taking place either in the social space, or you could use media tools to see what the hot topics are out there. So I think it's as important as it is to know about what your audiences are talking about. It's also really important to know about how the topics you are interested in are being discussed, in the external space. I think in the past I've also used, speaking of tools, I've used workload management tools like Basecamp. So, for example, in my last job, I did the redesign of UCL's homepage. So, working with an agency and other colleagues, it was really helpful to have this tool where we could have conversations, we could upload files, we could tick off to-do lists. It was a project management tool, but I found it incredibly useful to make sure that the project was, moving in the way that it should, and all the people, everything that needed to be done was ticked off, and all the resources that we were using could be found in one place. But I think in this day and age, when we have lockdown and home working, it's not just valuable for projects, but for the day-to-day job.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So we're reaching the end of the time for our interview. Do you have any parting advice for other content marketers or social media managers out there?
I think, yes, I think it's really important to know, what the power of social media is and to harness it. I also think it's not something, a social media strategy is not something that's a standalone. It really needs to work alongside your business priorities, what you know about your audiences, and a strong content pipeline, and your other digital channels. I also think it's really important to, and this is not just with on social media, but it's really important to measure and and track the performance of your content, and then to apply those insights and feed them back into any future content that you're creating.
Absolutely. As someone from journalism, I think that's been like the biggest learning curve for me, but definitely super fascinating and interesting aspect of content marketing. Well, thank you, Ishani, so much for sharing your insights with us. It was an awesome interview. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaheen. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's really good chatting to you as well.
And thanks everybody for listening in. For more perspectives on the content marketing industry in Europe, check out thecontentmix.com and keep tuning in to podcasts like this one for more interviews every weekday. See you next time.